The Horror at Red Hook by Howard Phillips Lovecraft. The Haunted Detective. In the heart of 1920s New York, where the jazz age was as vibrant as the bustling streets, Detective Thomas F. Malone's office stood as a stark contrast to the city's exuberance. The evening shadows stretched like spectral fingers across his cluttered desk, and the musty scent of old paper mingled with the faint odor of tobacco. The rhythmic ticking of the aged clock was a relentless reminder of the time slipping away as he scrutinized the files of Robert Sudam, his mind a whirlpool of dark thoughts. "Malone, you've been at it for hours," Detective Johnson observed, his sturdy frame silhouetted in the doorway before he flicked on the light, chasing away the comforting gloom. Malone squinted, the harsh light an unwelcome intruder. "I can't shake it off, Johnson. This case, it's a labyrinth with walls closing in." Johnson, a man of solid build with a face weathered by years on the force, moved to lean against the desk, his eyes scanning the open file. "Sudam, the hermit now playing the socialite?" "Exactly. And he's meddling with forces beyond our ken," Malone murmured, a shiver of unease running through him. "He's entangled with esoteric circles, dabbling in the arcane." Johnson's brow furrowed. "You're talking about cults?" Malone's lips tightened. "No jest, Johnson. Whispers of human trafficking, pacts with entities beyond our realm." A heavy silence fell, laden with the weight of Malone's words. Johnson's demeanor grew serious. "What's our plan?" "We must unravel Sudam's web, expose his connections. A malevolence festers in Red Hook, and it's hungry." Johnson nodded, his resolve mirroring Malone's. "We'll delve deeper, but tread lightly, Malone. This case shouldn't consume you." Malone's gaze fixed back on the file, his determination stealing. "That ship has sailed, Johnson. This enigma has burrowed deep." He sensed the peril that lay ahead, yet retreat was not an option. The enigma of Robert Sudam had ensnared him, and he would pursue it to the bitter end, no matter the cost. The darkness of Red Hook beckoned, whispering secrets he was compelled to uncover, even if it meant staring into the abyss itself. The Recluses Transformation. The Red Hook community was abuzz, not with tales of Robert Sudam's physical transformation, which had been thoroughly dissected in prior gossip, but with the peculiar company he now kept. The once solitary scholar was seen consorting with individuals of dubious repute, whose presence in the neighborhood was as conspicuous as it was enigmatic. These so-called gangsters and foreigners, Kurds speaking an obscure dialect, were known to dabble in the illicit trades of smuggling and bootlegging. Yet, their newfound allegiance to Sudam suggested a deeper connection to the esoteric circles he frequented. One evening, as Detective Malone observed the comings and goings at Sudam's mansion, a peculiar incident caught his attention. A frantic messenger, cloaked in the garb of the esoteric order, was turned away at the door, his urgent whispers about a breach in the circle going unheeded. This clue, seemingly minor, resonated with Malone, hinting at a schism within the secretive group that could be the key to unraveling Sudam's enigmatic activities. The dark ceremonies that took place under the cover of night were no mere rumors. Chants in a guttural tongue, the clinking of archaic instruments, and the scent of rare incenses seeping from the mansion's crevices painted a vivid picture of rituals steeped in antiquity. These rites, Malone surmised, were not just for show but were integral to the group's pursuit of otherworldly power. Determined to expose the truth behind Sudam's transformation and the esoteric order's intentions, Malone devised a plan. He would infiltrate their next gathering, disguised as one of the foreign attendees. With careful observation and a keen ear for their cryptic language, he hoped to gather enough evidence to shed light on the darkness that had enveloped Red Hook. Malone was resolute. The veil of secrecy would be lifted, and the true nature of Sudam's metamorphosis would be revealed to all. Death and discovery. The night was unusually silent in Red Hook. Detective Thomas F. Malone walked the cobblestone streets, the strange events that had led him here replaying in his mind. He stopped in front of a decrepit building and pushed open the door. Inside, Officer O'Neill awaited, his face pale. "We found him," O'Neill said simply. Malone followed O'Neill to a small courtyard where the body of Robert Sudem lay under the moonlight, his eyes staring emptily at the sky. "What happened?" Malone asked. "We don't know, sir," O'Neill replied. "But there's something not right about this place." Malone's attention was drawn to a soft splash from the canal. Approaching the edge, he saw shapes moving beneath the surface. "Get some men down here," Malone ordered. "We need to search the canal." As dawn broke, the search revealed chained prisoners and bones, evidence of the kidnapping epidemic in Red Hook. Malone stood by the water's edge, the puzzle pieces coming together. The cult's reach was far beyond what anyone had imagined. "Detective," O'Neill interrupted Malone's thoughts, holding a waterlogged note found among Sudem's personal effects. It instructed the captain of a ship to hand over Sudem's body without question. Malone felt a chill. This was a web of darkness that had ensnared the entire community, and he was determined to unravel it. The cult's shadow. The night was thick with fog as Detective Malone stepped cautiously through the narrow cobblestone streets of Red Hook. The dim glow of the gas lamps did little to pierce the darkness that seemed to cling to the old buildings like a second skin. He could hear the distant sound of chanting, a low and monotonous drone that sent shivers down his spine. "Stay sharp, Malone," he muttered to himself, his hand resting on the revolver holstered at his side. As he approached the old church that had been converted into a dance hall, the chanting grew louder, and he could now make out the rhythmic stomping of feet. He peered through a cracked window and saw a group of figures cloaked in dark robes, their faces hidden by hoods moving in a circle around a flickering fire. Malone knew he had found the heart of the cult's shadow. He found an unlocked door and slipped inside, his footsteps silent on the dusty floor. The air was thick with incense, and the walls were adorned with strange symbols that seemed to writhe in the flickering light. At the center of the room stood a tall, imposing figure, known only as the Hierophant, his voice rising above the others as he led the chant. "O friend and companion of night," the Hierophant intoned, "thousand-faced moon, look favorably on our sacrifices." Malone watched as the cultists brought forth a trembling figure, a newcomer to the town known only as John Doe, bound and hooded. The detective knew he had to act fast. "Please, everyone stay where you are," Malone shouted, drawing his revolver. The cultists scattered like roaches, but Malone kept his eyes fixed on the Hierophant. The man turned to face him, a twisted smile on his lips. "You're too late, detective," the Hierophant said. "The shadows have already welcomed us." Malone took a step forward, his revolver trained on the Hierophant. "What have you done with the missing people? Where are they?" The Hierophant's smile widened. "They've been given the gift of power, detective. Power beyond your wildest dreams." Malone felt a chill run through him as he realized the true depth of the cult's reach. They were not just smugglers. They were worshippers of ancient, malevolent forces. "You're under arrest," Malone said, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. But before he could move, the floor beneath him began to tremble, and a deep, guttural roar filled the air. The fire at the center of the room blazed higher, casting monstrous shadows on the walls. Malone remembered the old legends of the land, the tales of a slumbering beast beneath the church, and he knew then that the cult had awakened something sinister. With a determined look, he stepped forward, ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead. Rituals of darkness. The church was silent, a stark contrast to the bustling streets of Red Hook outside. Detective Malone stepped cautiously over the threshold, his eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the stained glass. The pews were empty, but the air was thick with the residue of incense and something else. Something unsettling. Malone moved towards the altar, where candles flickered, casting long shadows. He noticed a book, its pages open and filled with strange symbols that made his head throb just to look at them. Malone's hand moved to his badge, a gesture of authority in the face of the unknown. "What secrets are hidden here?" he muttered to himself. The shadows seemed to grow darker, and Malone could hear the faint sound of chanting rising from beneath the church. He knew he had to act fast. "Whatever was planned here, it's my duty to uncover it," Malone declared, his resolve firm. Malone took a step back, his mind racing. He needed to find a way to stop whatever had been set in motion. But as the chanting grew louder, he realized that this was bigger than any case he'd ever faced. This was a battle against the darkness itself, and he was all that stood in its way. The ancient evil. Detective Malone arrived at the heart of Red Hook's decay, a dilapidated church that now served as the cult's unholy sanctuary. The air inside was heavy with incense and the murmur of voices as cloaked figures gathered around a stone altar. A man stood at the center, holding a golden amulet that glinted in the candlelight. "O ancient ones, Gorgo, Mormo, keepers of the thousand-faced moon," he intoned. "Hear our call, accept our sacrifices, and grant us the power of the night." The congregation's response was a haunting echo. A young boy, no older than 14, was led to the altar. With a deep breath, Malone stepped out and declared, "This ends now." His badge glinted in the dim light. Startled by the intrusion, the cultists turned. The leader faced Malone, but before he could speak, a sudden tremor shook the church. The amulet began to glow with an otherworldly light, and the air filled with a sound like the beating of wings. Malone lunged forward, tackling the leader to the ground. The amulet flew from his grasp, shattering against the stone floor. A scream pierced the night, not from the cultists, but from the very walls of the church itself. As the last echoes of the scream faded, the cultists fled into the night. Malone looked around, the weight of the night's events heavy on his shoulders. He offered a hand to the boy, who nodded with newfound strength. They stepped out into the dawn of a new day, the church behind them now just an old building. The memory of the night's encounter would linger as a reminder of the ancient evil that once lurked in the shadows of Red Hook. The cult's reach. Detective Malone, his senses alert to the unusual stillness, surveyed the area. The room, stripped of its previous peculiarities, now presented a stark, unadorned reality. Malone's attention was drawn not by the tangible, but by the intangible, a palpable tension in the air, a residue of fear and secrecy that clung to the very walls. Without the distraction of the young boy's account, Malone's investigation took on a more methodical pace. He scrutinized every inch of the space, searching for clues that lay beyond the obvious. His focus was interrupted only by the discovery of a peculiar mark on the floor, unobtrusive yet deliberate, its purpose a mystery that beckoned further inquiry. The narrative shifted as Malone pieced together the silent stories told by the remnants left behind. Each clue whispered of hidden knowledge and forbidden practices, of a group that sought to operate in the shadows of society. The detective's resolve hardened. He knew that the key to unraveling this enigma lay in understanding the unseen connections that bound this place to its silent guardians. As the chapter closed, Malone stood alone, the weight of the unknown pressing upon him. The cult's presence had been erased, yet the echo of their rituals lingered. In the quiet aftermath, Malone was left with more questions than answers, the true extent of the cult's machinations still veiled in shadow. The story continued, its next chapter unwritten, as the detective stepped into the darkness, determined to bring light to the secrets that hid within. Sealing the darkness. The night was thick with fog as Detective Malone stood at the edge of the canal, the murky waters lapping at the old brickwork. The air was heavy with the scent of the sea and something else, something foul and ancient. He turned to his partner, Officer Daniels, a young man with a determined look in his eyes. "Tonight's the night, Daniels. We seal away this darkness once and for all," Malone said, his voice low but resolute. Daniels nodded, gripping the handle of his flashlight tighter. "What's the plan, Detective?" Malone pointed to the decrepit church standing ominously in the distance. "We start there. The cult's been using the underground channels to move around the city unseen. It's how they've been conducting their activities without us catching wind." They made their way to the church, the silence of the night broken only by the sound of their footsteps echoing on the cobblestone streets. As they entered, they were met with the familiar sight of neglect that had taken over the place. "We seal the channels," Malone replied, pulling out a map of the underground network. "We've identified the main junctions. If we collapse them, the cult will have no way to move around the city." The two set to work, placing explosives at strategic points in the tunnels. The task was dangerous, and the sense of urgency was palpable. After setting the last charge, Malone took a deep breath and looked at Daniels. "Ready?" Daniels nodded, and together they pressed the detonator. A series of muffled booms echoed through the tunnels, and the ground shook beneath their feet. Dust and debris filled the air as the channels collapsed, sealing away the pathways the cult had used for their nefarious deeds. As the dust settled, Malone and Daniels emerged from the church, the first light of dawn breaking on the horizon. The city of Red Hook would wake to a new day, free from the shadow that had lurked beneath its streets. "We did it, Detective," Daniels said, a smile breaking through the exhaustion. Malone nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. "Yes, we did, and we'll keep watching, always one step ahead." As they walked back to the precinct, the sun rose higher, casting away the last of the shadows. The city was safe for now, but Malone knew that the fight against the darkness was never truly over.